Good evening to everyone that's Zooming in tonight, and welcome to Preservation Virginia's 2021 virtual legislative reception. I am Genevieve Keller. I chair the Board of Trustees of Preservation Virginia, and I speak to you tonight on their behalf. We have been doing this event for so many years now that I've lost count, but this is the first time that we have done it virtually, and so you are our charter participants now. Our staff has worked very hard to put this event together tonight, and it would be very difficult to do it without the guidance and insights of Trustee Trip Pollard, who's an essential member of our team all year, but especially during the legislative session. We're delighted to have Secretary Strickler with us, as well as several legislators. And while we have some changes to our agenda because of late changes in the committee meeting, we'll cover all the material that you see. We're sorry that Senator McClellan cannot attend tonight because of a conflict with a lately scheduled committee meeting. So you'll see her name, but she will not be with us tonight. And of course, we're also happy to have Julie Langan, the Director of the Department of Historic Resources. We depend on her and her DHR staff throughout the Commonwealth for very good and diligent work. And much of our legislative agenda this year is in support of their critical ongoing programs, as well as the equity initiatives that are long overdue. And later in the program, you will hear from our CEO, Elizabeth Kostelny, who has reached an important milestone of working with our organization now for 30 years. I'm happy to say we presented her with a board resolution in December to honor that exemplary service. And I also want to extend heartfelt thank yous to our sponsors. We so appreciate them. Linden Capital, I see Jim Bonbright is on the call. And I always enjoy visiting with him in person, so I'll miss that this year. And also Daniel and Company, National Trust Insurance Services, Hirschler, Commonwealth Advisors, Trip Pollard and Elizabeth Oka, Dale and Elizabeth Kostelny, and of course, my spouse, Tim Keller, and I support this program every year. This support of our advocacy effort makes all the difference, and it helps us to be able to carry on our work all through the year and to retain the services of Hunter Jamerson, who's also with us tonight, and you'll hear from him later. If you're not a sponsor and would like to support our work, please visit our website and make a contribution there at preservationvirginia.org. In past years, Preservation Virginia has successfully supported our robust state certified tax credit program for historic building rehabilitations. We enjoy and depend on the support of developers and investors, and also from the home builders, AIA Virginia, and others who are part of our coalition that help to keep the historic tax credit program in place. There's only one bill this year, HB 1928, that affects tax credits, and it seeks to expand access to the program. But we're always diligent about making the case about how important this is to Virginia's economy. And tax credits will probably be ever more so as we embrace efforts to climb out of and recover financially from the pandemic in Virginia's communities. This program will help in rebuilding businesses and in retaining and expanding housing at all economic levels. Our public policy work is really important to us, and we depend on all of you financially, but also in sending emails and texts to your legislators. We really rely on people like all of you to be engaged constituents. So through the session, please check your inboxes for legislative alerts from Preservation Virginia. And now it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you Professor Colita Fairfax. Dr. Fairfax is a professor, an Honors College Senior Faculty Fellow, and an inaugural faculty scholar in the Center for African American Public Policy at Norfolk State University. She's the author of many publications, including Hampton, Virginia in 2005, Timeless History and Service, the Iota Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc., 1922 to our time, which was published in 2017. And she's the editor of the 2016 book, Social Work, Marriage, and Ethnicity, Policy and Practice, and most recently of the 2021 work, The African Experience in Colonial Virginia, that addresses Virginia's complicated beginnings in new essays that reckon with this history and its continuing effects 400 years later. Some of these essays address women in this period, something that doesn't always happen. So thank you, Dr. Fairfax, for that. She also wrote the foreword for a guidebook to Virginia's African-American historical markers. Dr. Fairfax, who was awarded her PhD from Temple University, also earned a Master of Social Work from Rutgers University and her Bachelor of Social Work from Howard University. Dr. Fairfax was appointed to the City of Hampton's 400th Commemorative Commission in 2010 and served as co-chairman of the City of Hampton's 2019 commission. And former Governor Macaulay appointed her to the State Board of Historic Resources in 2016, and she currently is serving as their chair. Governor Ralph Northam reappointed her in 2020, and she also serves on the Commission for Historic Statues in the United States Capitol. Dr. Fairfax, we thank you for your service, and we really look forward to your remarks this evening. Dr. Fairfax.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mrs. Keller and Mrs. Costelli, for allowing me just a few moments to talk about equity and inclusion in preservation. Greetings to Will, who's a new friend, and all state dignitaries assembled, Secretary Matt Strickler, Mrs. Julie Langen, my own beloved colleagues with the Department of Historic Resources, and all preservationists assembled. I'd like to acknowledge Attorney Trip Pollard, who is a new member of the board, and I look forward to working with him in the coming years. I do believe metaphysically and metaphorically that we are still in the 400th year cyclical moment where there are vast societal changes occurring all around us. From 1619 to COVID-19, our society finds itself at an inflection moment of change within social institutions, resource allocations, power distribution, and tangible forms of equality and equity. So what does that look like to those of us who engage in preservation? It means that we really should join the sea of change, knowing that our efforts have really not always been inclusive. Our boards, trustees, and staff are not always reflective of cultural groups who have contributed immensely to the Commonwealth. Black experts are often asked to participate in important preservation projects without remuneration. And some of our projects are wedded to narratives of whiteness and privilege, ignoring other rich narratives that offer facts and valuable perspectives. Lands and spaces where cultural groups have occupied continuously are not regarded as worthy of registry nominations or simply not included. So will the preservation community remain sidelined, stoic, and stale, or will it join the rest of the country as we move forward? Will the preservation community show how to share resources, expand protection of historic territories, extend budgetary support, advocate for accurate civics and social studies school curricula, institutional capacity of, and experiential activities at certain sites, such as the First Baptist Church South Richmond, who has a fabulous archives, or the James Solomon Russell St. Paul's College Museum in Lawrenceville, Virginia, or Wallace Jewelry Store on Broad Street for easement protection and nomination. Will the preservation community show historic empathy and make tangible efforts to demonstrate that it is really ready to turn the page? Will the preservation community support needed legislation for our state HBCUs to create preservation departments and certificate programs? Will the preservation community ensure that contractors, experts, and partnerships include racial groups, not only on paper, but in budgets whose stories are significantly important in our Commonwealth? We need to be mindful that systemic neglect, decay, and gentrification of Black neighborhoods render important spaces and narratives vulnerable to destruction. Budget cuts and the allocation of community development block grants and resources have rendered impoverished communities vulnerable to preservation activities. What will be our efforts to finance and preserve, for example, homes of Black social and thought leaders, headquarters of groups and burial grounds and community museums in Church Hill and Northside and the West End and other enclaves in cities and in counties. So we cannot boast that we live in a collective nation without a collection of narratives and preservation spaces that show accuracy in how America is and how it came to be. So equity and inclusion are not rhetorical. They are not symbolic gestures, to quote a patron saint on his birthday in January, or during African American Heritage Month. It isn't your personal appreciation for jazz, the classical American art form, or the golden era of hip hop. We should see concepts of equity and inclusion in every aspect of our work, from those who make decisions, who implement those decisions, who benefit and who are impacted by those decisions. During the civil rights movement, our legal experts are quoted often as saying, as Virginia goes, so does the rest of the country. Will preservation community efforts lead and reframe its mission, adding to its registry locations that tell of the breadth of contributions and sacrifices of African Americans and of our first Americans, our indigenous citizens? Or will it remain a discipline only vibrant among one community? It isn't happenstance that thousands of people converged in my hometown of Richmond in the Monument District this summer, because Richmond has its place in public memory as the bastion of Confederate ideology and preservation. This past summer was a clarion call to awaken your sensibilities about the political and ideological manifestations of preservation in the 21st century. This 400th moment finds us at the precipice of change in every social institution, power dynamics, and systemic relationships. The preservation community must discontinue practices that render racial groups either on the margin or invisible, and or then encourage a diversity deficit. Show that the values of preservation include all groups and all spaces. So equity and inclusion are not elusive. If they are truly indeed preservation concepts, we should then see them in all of our spaces. I thank you for this moment.
Thank you, Dr. Fairfax. We're grateful for your inspiring words tonight and adding context to this moment in time and the opportunity and intersections between history, historic preservation, and public policy. And for presenting the questions we all need to be asking each day as we go about our work and consider the complexity of history and the places and people that is shared within them. I'm Elizabeth Kostelny. I'm CEO of Preservation Virginia, and I want to add my welcome to everyone who's joining us virtually tonight. Before we begin to hear from our other panelists, a few housekeeping items. We will hold questions till the end of our time together and get to as many of those as possible. So if you would look down at the bottom of your screen to the Q&A block, you can write your questions there. We'll be collecting them and be able to, as I said, get to as many as possible at the end of our session. The session is being recorded, and we'll post the recording both in the blog section of our website and I believe in an email that'll go out to all the participants today. And so it's my pleasure now to introduce Matthew J. Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Prior to joining the administration and returning to Richmond, he served as a senior policy advisor to Democratic members of the House of Representatives on natural resources. He holds a master's in public policy and marine science from the College of William & Mary and the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And during his tenure as secretary, he's worked tirelessly to support historic preservation concerns and to really raise the profile and efforts at the Department of Historic Resources. Secretary Strickler.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. It's good to be here with you all tonight, and thanks for having me. Chairwoman Keller, thanks for all of your work and hosting this event, and certainly Trip Pollard, a friend of the administration in more ways than one. It's great to see you as well. You know, this is a little bit different, obviously. It's very nice to be able to have the reception with you all downtown in Richmond during session, but you know, a lot of folks have kind of punted and not gotten together for these types of things virtually this year, and I think it's great that Preservation Virginia is doing this. It's good to, you know, to try to gather and try to remember as best we can, you know, the reason why we all do this, and it's about each other, and it's about our shared history and humanity as Virginians, and it's an important thing to do, you know, in any way that we can. So just thank you for that. You know, Preservation Virginia is such a key partner, collaborating with us on everything from surveying Rosenwald schools to co-hosting educational events on, you know, various topics, including the preservation of African American historical resources, cemetery preservation, all the way to the impacts of sea level rise and flooding on historic communities and historic artifacts, and you know, assisting us with a recent compilation and competition related to the Black History highway markers that we did in the Virginia Public Schools last year, which was so successful. So thank you all for your partnership. You know, we've got Director Langan here. Julie, your work at the department, particularly during this pandemic, has just been incredible. You all have accomplished so much, and you've got such a great team and a hardworking and dedicated and passionate staff over there. So thank you for your work. Of course, Chairwoman Fairfax, you know, we couldn't do any of this without you, and it's been great to partner with you on so many efforts. And of course, our General Assembly members, I know that some of the folks who are supposed to be here tonight weren't able to show, and that just happens during session. But Senator Hashmi, Delegate Carr, it's been great to work with you during my time in the administration, and you all are such passionate champions for historic preservation and for Virginia's environment, and it's great to see you as well. Tonight, I'd like to just give one more a shout out to a couple members of my team in the Secretary's office that really do a lot of the work, frankly, and make me and make the governor look very good. And that's, of course, Deputy Secretary Joshua Sachs, and now Assistant Secretary Miriam Karad. Josh and Miriam both have done a tremendous amount of work, you know, on historic resources and some of the initiatives that we've worked together with the department, Preservation Virginia, and others to advance. So, you know, with that, I'll just say a few words. You know, it's been a dramatic year for making history and thinking about how we interpret and recognize and celebrate history, especially in Virginia. And Lord, Virginia history is hard. And a lot of people are realizing that now, exactly how hard it is. And the fact that people are having to face that is great for our Commonwealth. And, you know, it comes about in challenging ways. You know, it comes about in fits and starts. But, you know, right now we're having a moment in the Commonwealth. As Dr. Fairfax said, it's a time for change, and it's a time for reflection, and it's a time that, you know, we're really, you know, people are paying more attention to historic work and historic preservation and what it means than ever before. You know, and that's great. I mean, if you ask me how much of my time I would spend on historic resources when I took this job, I would not have said as much as I do. I mean, I probably spent a quarter of my time working on historic resources and working with DHR, and it's great. It's been fun. It's been incredibly rewarding, and you know, being able to work with Governor Northam, work with all of our partners in historic preservation and elsewhere, to really kind of crystallize this concept of historic justice in Virginia, and really turn Virginia into a leader on this front, and play a major role in you know, some of the big societal shifts and societal conversations that are going on right now around our reckoning with race and our reckoning with our history and the reinterpretation of our historic, of our history and of the way that our history is told is really fascinating and makes me really proud. And historic justice, if I haven't talked to you about this, or if Josh hasn't talked to you about this, is, we view it as a concept and kind of a movement that's dedicated to telling a more inclusive history that accurately reflects the experiences of people of all races, religions, communities, genders, you name it, across Virginia. And it's an idea that's premised on the basic concept that in order to understand and respect a people's experience, any people, we have to humanize those people, and we have to honor the people who have lived that experience, and we have to stand in their shoes, and we have to understand, and we have to accept, and those are hard things to do sometimes. But it's okay to say I don't know, and it's okay to ask questions. And I think being open to that and being able to tell some of these stories in a different way and in a more historically accurate and as Dr. Fairfax says, empathetic way. Is a really important thing to do. And so that's kind of been the focus of our work. And so how have we tried to put that in action? So it's General Assembly session on the legislative side. If you all remember last session, we passed legislation that allows localities to make their own decisions about war memorials. We created a new African-American cemetery preservation fund and a commission on statues in the U.S. Capitol to deal with the fact that one of our two representatives of the Commonwealth, Virginia, and the United States Capitol Statuary Hall was Confederate General Robert E. Lee. That is no longer the case. Lee has been removed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also last session protected several key historic justice sites like the Freedom House in Alexandria, and we've got money in the budget this year to carry that work forward. This session, we're advancing legislation that changes the name of my secretariat from the Secretariat of Natural Resources to the Secretary of Natural and Cultural Resources. And this really reflects, I think, the emphasis and the focus on cultural and historic resources protection and the preservation aspects of our work that are so important and central to what we do. DHR is also supporting legislation to make it easier for historically disenfranchised communities to protect historic sites without having to complete the formal and sometimes expensive and tedious register listing process. We'd like to be able to protect those sites and then hopefully go back and get them listed when resources are available. And we'll continue, as I mentioned, our work to update Virginia's contribution to the U.S. Capitol Statuary Hall. We're pursuing a resolution affirming civil rights hero Barbara Rose Johns will be the next to represent the Commonwealth in the U.S. Capitol. And that's something that's really special. We expect that resolution to pass. It's out of the House committee. It should pass the Senate Rules Committee tomorrow and move on to the floor. And then the real work begins, right? We've got to hire a sculptor and get the statue done and get it installed. And we've got a great commission put together with Senator Lucas and Delegate Jawan Ward and Dr. Fairfax and others that has really been serious and thoughtful about the work of talking about this issue and about selecting a replacement for Robert E. Lee. So more exciting things to come there. In addition to those legislative items, we've got a number of things in the budget that are really important that Governor Northam has opposed, nearly $25 million overall to transform historical sites and advance historic justice in Virginia. And that includes $11 million to support efforts to transform Monument Avenue in Richmond, $9 million for the development of the Slavery Heritage Site and improvements to the Slave Trail and Shockoe Bottom in Richmond, $100,000 for the Virginia Emancipation and Freedom Monument Project on Browns Island, $5 million to repatriate tombstones from the former Columbian Harmony Cemetery in Washington, D.C., and create a living shoreline using some of the material that we aren't able to repatriate on the Potomac River. And that's telling that story would be a whole nother 10 minutes that I don't have tonight, but the fact that a whole cemetery was torn up in Washington, D.C., one of the 5 original African-American cemeteries in the city. And the headstones were used to stabilize somebody's shoreline along the Potomac River in Virginia, is really tragic. And we're trying to do as right as we can by that, involving the descendants of those who were buried. And again, trying to create a memorial at the new Harmony Cemetery out in Landover, Maryland, to do as much as we can to right that historic wrong. As I mentioned, there's also a little over $500,000 for the National Statuary Hall project, and also a position finally. And Director Langen has been very patient with us on this, an additional position in the budget for a cemetery preservationist at DHR. And this is, of course, on top of historic investments that we've made in the biennial budget for a more inclusive telling of and truthful telling of history at some iconic Virginia sites like Monticello and Montpelier. So a lot of good work going there on the legislative side and on the budget side. In addition, things that are coming up this year, we're hoping to open the Green Pastures Longwood Recreation area in Allegheny County. That, of course, was one of the few public parks that was open to African Americans during segregation, when they couldn't, for example, go, and when African Americans couldn't, for example, go to nearby Douthit State Park. That's going to be a really cool project that we've funded and are hoping to construct. We're working to open Machicomico State Park in Gloucester County. This would be our first park dedicated to telling the story of Virginia Indians, and that's been a really cool project to work on with the tribes and with DCR and the historic preservation community. And of course, we're going to continue to work on Fort Monroe and telling that story as well. As Dr. Fairfax mentioned, we're still kind of in the in the aura and the glow of the events that we had for the recognition of the 400th anniversary of the African landing, and there's still a lot of work to do along that. We're continuing to expand and grow our highway marker program. We're working to protect Rassawek, the historic seat of the Monacan Nation at Point of Fork on the confluence of the James and the Ravenna River. And we've repatriated the first land, and this is really cool, to the Chickahominy tribe. Chickahominy on the James, 105 acres. We were able to put a conservation easement on, and we're working to procure another piece of property for them as well. So all of those things are great. We're also continuing to work towards a more systematic and data-driven approach to historic resources protection, updating our Conserve Virginia model to focus on and refine the historic and cultural layer to include more sites. Our last expansion, for example, prioritized Civil War battlefields where U.S. colored troop regiments fought, and we're looking to identify and protect more of those, so including native Indian sites and battlefields of historic significance. So a lot going on, a lot of good things. Again, thanks to everybody for your continued partnership, and just know that my staff and I are here to work with you, and call us up whenever you got a question. We're happy to help out. And certainly Director Langen is the one that you'll be working with most closely, but we're here as well. So I'll stop there. Happy to stick around and answer any questions that folks have as well, though. And again, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much, Secretary Strickler. It's great to hear all of those things and to know that there's so much crossover between Preservation Virginia's activities and some of the initiatives that you talked about and the work with the Department of Historic Resources. We very much value that. Next, I'd like to introduce Senator Ghazala Hashmi. She is an experienced educator and advocate who has spent over 25 years working with Virginia's college and university system. She's currently serves as the founding director of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning at Reynolds Community College. She was elected to represent Virginia's District 10 in 2019, and we've been honored to work with the senator to help save the Pine Grove community in Cumberland County and its historic African American school threatened by a proposed landfill. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, and delighted to be here this evening to join Preservation Virginia. I'll just make a quick adjustment to the introduction. I was the former director for that center, but the General Assembly work is an all-time consuming job, and I've stepped off of that position and focus just in the General Assembly. But I think what you highlighted is really important. You know, I taught American literature for close to 30 years, and American literature is so directly connected to American history. And I always ask my students to think about how we know our history. How do we know the stories? How do we know what's important? And who gets to tell the stories? Who gets to talk about what narratives are preserved and whose narrative in particular is preserved. So I think what we've heard from the Secretary, Virginia is to be applauded for all of the efforts it's making to preserve its history, and not just the history of one people, but of all peoples that are part of this community in this great state. So I really applaud the clear direction that we have in the Commonwealth in making these important steps. And I want to thank Dr. Fairfax too. What a beautiful and lyrical, it was a lyrical introduction that you provided us to get us to think about the value and the richness and the context of all of those historical and cultural artifacts that we have, and particularly how they resonate in this time period that we are living through, and what they mean for us, because they take on a different meaning for every generation that encounters them. So thank you very much. I'll just quickly talk a little bit about legislation that I have in front of this 2021 Assembly that is particularly resonant with Preservation Virginia, and that is the bill. It's SB 1186. And it is, as Elizabeth was sharing, an attempt to put into code the idea of historical preservation in the context of the decisions that we make around environment, and particularly with landfills, that if we are going to impose landfills in our communities, what are the, not just the environmental impacts, but what are the historical impacts? And again, whose stories are going to be taken away by these kinds of environmental concerns that we have. And for Preservation Virginia, this is a particularly resonant bill. Preservation Virginia works so hard to ensure the protection of Pine Grove School in Cumberland County, placing it on the list of one of the endangered historical sites that we have in Virginia, and helping to share the story, share the message, not just of the school, but of the community that lives there and has generations deep connections to this historical location. So in the code, we are asking our agencies to consider the impact on historic sites, not just on the environment as we contemplate the creation of a landfill. I would really love to have the support of Preservation Virginia and everyone who's listening to help champion this particular legislation. It will be in front of the Agricultural Committee next week, and we just need to have strong voices to make sure that everybody knows how important it is to preserve these endangered sites. So I'll stop there, and happy to take questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Senator. That is one of the bills that, if you've been following, for folks in the audience, if you've been following our legislative alerts, that we are supporting. And so we will definitely look for that committee hearing so we can lend our support there. So thank you very much. Pine Grove is a very special place, and there's so many others like it that deserve protection. Now we'll hear from Delegate Betsy Carr. She was elected to the Virginia House of Delegates in 2009, representing parts of the city of Richmond on both sides of the James River. And in the House of Delegates, she serves on the Appropriations, Transportation, General Laws, and Rules Committee. She chairs the Appropriations, Higher Education, General Laws, Open Government, and Procurement and Transportation subcommittees. And we've greatly appreciated her support over the years, particularly for this underwater archaeological program that she's going to talk about. So, Delegate Carr.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be with you here. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. Thank you all for the work that you do in our communities and the energy that you provide for this important effort of preservation. And I am so excited, to hear what the Secretary said about, familiar with all of those pieces, but kind of hearing it all at once. Has a major impact. I also am so happy I'm putting in a little budget amendment, which I hope will enhance, just fit in with all of this, the untold history that we're in, unrecognized cultural aspects that we perhaps have not gotten to yet. And it is, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, it's underwater, but I understand now I need to call it maritime. Maritime is the word to use, maritime archaeology. And we're putting in money in the budget for a maritime archaeologist. Very important for Virginia to have one of those. Why? Because Virginia is one of the only coastal states that doesn't have a maritime archaeologist. And I think about 10% of Virginia's land is underwater. So it's very important for us to inventory, preserve, protect these aspects that lie in the water, under the sand, and we're our whole history needs to be told, and a lot of it is lying in the water, under the sand, and so forth. An example of why we need one is, for instance, when there was somebody doing some exploring and metallurgists and so forth, and they dug up part of the Jamestown fort. So what we've done is we've lost that historical record in the way that we should have it. So just very excited about what we can do with that once we have that. And we have lots of support from not only people in Virginia, but people up and down the coast in the United States about how this is so important. And has been pointed out, Virginia has so much history here that needs we have recorded some, but there's so much that hasn't been honored and brought up. And this is adding to that, that we can add the water, underwater aspect part of Virginia, so that we have our whole history, not only of the land, but of the water and of all of the people that need to be honored in our culture.
Thank you so much, Delegate Carr. And we know well that very sensitive history that lies on our shorelines and just beyond the shorelines under the water that needs to be protected. So thank you for this budget amendment. Next, we'll hear from two very important people in our everyday lives at Preservation Virginia, Trip Pollard and Hunter Jamerson. Hunter Jamerson is an attorney with Macaulay and Jamerson and is Preservation Virginia's lobbyist in the General Assembly. Trip Pollard is an attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, a vice president for our board of a vice chair of Preservation Virginia, and also serves as the chair of our public policy committee. these gentlemen during the General Assembly time especially keep us informed, help us evaluate positions and guide our work. And we meet weekly in order to stay abreast. So I will call on Hunter and then Tripp, I think, to go over a couple of the bills that we're supporting.
Good evening, Elizabeth. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Hope you're enjoying the virtual reception. I think it's terrific we can pull this off. We've had a great lineup this evening. I'll be brief. Secretary Strickler mentioned a couple of the bills that Preservation Virginia is supporting. The first one is House Bill 1836. Delegate Plum, Ken Plum, is the patron of this bill. Near and dear to the Secretary's heart, I'm sure, is the renaming of the Secretariat of Natural Resources as the Secretariat of Natural and Cultural Resources. And Secretary Strickler will now be the Secretary of Natural and Cultural Resources if this bill becomes law after July 1. So we're excited about this because I think, as you've heard tonight, clearly the breadth of historical resources in Virginia and those resources that ought to be preserved is much more expansive than what I think has historically been recognized in the state legislature and in the executive branch. So the addition of cultural resources is a very natural extension and a reflection of the breadth of things that Preservation Virginia is actively working to preserve today. So this is, I think, a very appropriate renaming of that institution and consistent with our mission. We're very pleased to support it. The other bill I wanted to highlight for you this evening is House Bill 1928. Delegate Aird, Lashreese Aird, is carrying this legislation, which Preservation Virginia supports. Initially, the legislation would have exempted acquisitions of historical properties from Department of General Services review, among other things. The substitute bill, however, is a little more narrow, keeps that DGS review in place, but it empowers the Department of Historic Resources and the Board of Historic Resources to now acquire and administer more than battlefields and designated landmarks as previously within their purview. But now it empowers the Board of Historic Resources, the Department of Historic Resources, to acquire and administer battlefield properties, designated landmarks, and other properties of historic significance as determined by the department. That's obviously a significant extension of the acquisition powers for properties and easements that the department and the board will have. We'll be excited to see how the department ultimately defines the breadth of properties of historic significance. But I think it goes without saying that empowering the department, the Board of Historic Resources, with these acquisition powers, administration powers, will be an excellent tool in our mission to preserve historic properties that go beyond designated historic landmarks and battlefields. So we applaud Delegate Aird for carrying this bill. We're supporting it and look forward to seeing it advance through the General Assembly. I will curtail it there and hand off to Tripp.
Thank you. And I do want to thank everyone for joining us this evening and for all of our wonderful speakers. You've heard about a whole lot of bills already tonight and budget amendments. So there's a lot going on in this short session of the General Assembly. Even though it's a virtual and online session, there's a lot that Preservation Virginia is covering and supporting. I wanted to just mention one more item that we haven't heard about yet. And that's because one of our speakers unfortunately had a last minute conflict and couldn't join us. And that's a budget amendment introduced by Senator McClellan. And this amendment would provide $250,000 to the Department of Historic Resources for surveying historic resources related to African American and Indigenous communities. It will do several things. It will support a staff position at DHR. It will also fund a grant program to provide paid internships to partner with Virginia's historically Black colleges and universities. And it will also fund database enhancements for Virginia's Cultural Resources Information System. So you put all these pieces together, and it's, I think, a very important budget amendment that will begin to address the fact that historic resources related to African American and Indigenous communities are woefully underrepresented in the state database. Unfortunately, this has resulted in important resources not being identified or recognized for preservation, nor have they often been included as a result in larger historic district conversations. So it's really important to get this funding, both for DHR staff and including HBCUs in this effort, increases the diversity in the preservation field, going back to Dr. Fairfax's remarks at the very beginning, and it raises the awareness of the cultural importance of these institutions and the direct role they play in uncovering untold histories. So this is, I think, a very important budget amendment. Preservation Virginia will be supporting this as well, and hope it will be adopted. So that, that I think is the run through of the main things we're working on, and I think we will now open it up, turn it back to Elizabeth. Is it time for question and answer?
Thanks, Trip. Probably given that, given the time, we probably have a couple of minutes or time for a couple of questions. There was a question about the Columbia Harmony Cemetery, Calderon State Park. And I guess this would go to Secretary Strickler or perhaps Julie Langen. With the funds that are set aside, first, they were very appreciative of that work. But with the funds set aside, will there be something at the park to tell the story?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's a good question. The answer is yes. We're working on exactly what that is, but there'll be some small memorial there to commemorate and to tell that story for sure. Some sort of interpretive signage, more almost certainly, although it hasn't been designed yet, but using as long as the descendants are okay with this, using some of the headstones that don't go to the memorial at the cemetery, the New Harmony Cemetery in Maryland. There'll also be, and we think that this is an appropriate and kind of cool project with a lot of the material that's there that's not identifiable, that they're not able to get names and dates off of. We're going to reuse that material to build a living shoreline project along the Potomac River, which instead of just having the stones there against the shoreline, blocking erosion, we're actually going to move them out, position them in a way that will allow them to buffer wave action, trap sediment, and support a living marsh community behind those, in addition to kind of grading and restoring the shoreline. So it'll be something that that benefits water quality, that benefits the Potomac River, the Chesapeake Bay, and as a kind of a lasting environmental legacy associated with this. So yes, absolutely, some good stuff going on at Calderon State Park.
Great, thank you. Delegate Carr, there was a thank you for the work you're doing with this maritime archaeologist position, and a question that Maryland has an underwater archaeologist on staff of an advisory board that assists that, and wanted to know if that was planned in Virginia as well.
If we can get that in the budget amendment is passed, and we will have the underwater archaeologist, and then we can go from there. I think the first step is getting that archaeologist, the marine archaeologist, in place, and our hope is that that will be expansive. And as the questioner pointed out, there's so much resources underwater. Obviously, we have many ships and so forth. We don't know what, say, slave ships might be underwater, but there's just so many treasures of our unknown history that are waiting for us to inventory and preserve. in Virginia waters.
So right. See, there's a question about, in terms of the governor's budget amendments related to Shockoe Bottom and the development of a slave heritage site. Is there any more detail that you can share about that, Secretary Strickler?
I don't have a ton of details to share there. I know that there has been some back and forth between the governor's office and the group who put together kind of the original plan for what they thought ought to happen down in that area with the Devil's Half Acre and some of those other sites, so Lumpkin Jail, and there's obviously more there that some people want preserved, and I think it's just a matter of finding a balance and using those resources in the most efficient way to protect what we're able to and get people in a comfortable place with what the project looks like. So, I think there'll be some additional planning, some additional give and take if we're lucky enough to get that appropriation approved. So more to come on that.
Okay. And because Preservation Virginia is part of the Shockoe Alliance in the city, I would also say that there's a lot of planning going on from the city's perspective, and that should be made public soon. So separate from what's going on at the General Assembly, that work is continuing. I would just, from Senator Hashmi and Delegate Carr, how can we help you with the legislation and the budget amendments that you have? How can we be of help to you in making sure that these get passed?
Thank you. Senator Hashmi.
Thank you so much. I think if folks can reach out directly to their representatives, their delegates and senators, that is really helpful when we hear from our own constituents and recognize that there is an issue of value and significance for them. That means a lot if it's a personal message that's directed towards us advocating for a particular issue. So an email, a phone call, that is very valuable.
Yes. We listen and record and take count of all those. And as Senator Hashmi indicated, it's really helpful. Sometimes there'll be a mass email that'll go out and it all says the same thing. But if somebody puts why they're adding on to that email, if they put something personal at the beginning, then that, or, lets us know that it's coming from them directly rather than some, email chain, that makes a big difference. And if you're interested in watching it's a lot easier now. It's more accessible. You can wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning and turn on the Zoom rather than getting in the car and going downtown for a committee meeting or something. But there are things, if you hear things and you question them and so forth, just watch. If you want to sign up at a committee meeting and speak on the importance of it. Or, like for instance, if we had, I think our budget hearings are over, but, if you sign up in committees, the bills that you want to make sure that you confirm, you can speak in the committee where it is going to appear. If you get online and you sign up, I think it's an hour beforehand, so you can get in the speaker queue. So sometimes there might be 20 speakers and maybe, we don't have that time to hear everyone, but they'll read out the names of saying these people representing such and such are here to speak on behalf of the bill. So that makes a difference, when people are listening on the committee. And as Senator Hashmi says, it's so important to speak to whoever is hiring you. Whoever you're hiring for our senators and delegates. We like to be responsive to the people that put us in office. And so it's important for us to hear what's important for you, what issues are important, what bills and so forth. So love continuing to hear from you. We have, we've been not only bills and so forth, but we've kind of just had back-to-back Zooms with people who are interested in various subjects, various issues, wanting us to know their priorities. And that's really important. It's really important for us to hear. So thank you for whatever energy and time you can take to make that happen.
Great, thank you. And that's a great segue into, there was a question about how to stay up to date. If you have not already, please do sign up for Preservation Virginia's alert. We send it out Mondays, and it's a listing of all of the legislation that we're following. And when there are key committee hearings or a piece of legislation or a budget amendment is up for a vote and we need constituents to talk to their legislators, we do send that information with talking points about what can be said about that particular point and when to get in touch. And I think it does mean a lot when constituents speak to their representatives on these committees, that these issues are important to them. So if you're not already on our list, please sign up. It's valuable not only in the General Assembly session, but we try to use it to keep up with other issues. One is the upcoming congressional session, and I'll throw out a request from both Julie and me. We are charged with Lobby Day at Congress, and it will be virtual this year, so much easier than traveling to Washington. But there too, Virginia needs to be visible. Historic tax credits can play a wonderful role in the recovery. And so please, I encourage you to go to our website and sign up for that, or follow the link in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow with a recording of this proceedings. And so we've hit that magic hour of 8 o'clock, but I do want to thank all of our panelists, Dr. Fairfax, Secretary Strickler, Delegate Carr, Senator Hashmi, Tripp, Pollard, and Hunter Jamerson for time that you've spent to prepare for today and sharing the information. It's very valuable. I also just want to give a shout out to our Board of Trustees and our gifted staff. I'm awed every day by their dedication and innovation and focus in protecting Virginia's historic places and ensuring that we are sharing all of the perspectives, that we are respecting the people of our past and ensuring that the places that represent that history will be part of our future. They have worked very hard to be accommodating during unusual circumstances of the pandemic. And I'm grateful for that work. And just another thank you to Julie Langen and the Department of Historic Resources for our partnership with the agency. We get a great deal of work done. But tonight would not have been possible without our sponsors. So once again, thank you to Linden Capital, Daniel and Company, the National Trust Insurance Services, Hirschler, Commonwealth Advisors, Tripp, Pollard, and Elizabeth Otka, and Genevieve and Timothy Keller. Your support is so important as we move through the General Assembly session and support our advocacy effort. So thank you, good night, and I hope everybody will stay well and that next year we might be together. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.